I'll mute myself.
Yep, we're recording.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 535th regular meeting of the Salt Creek Civil War Roundtable. There are a few announcements before we go ahead. I hope you noticed in your last newsletter, the Outpost, that there was a form for renewing or becoming a member, depending on where you are in the process. So please fill that out and get it to Jan. Mine went in the mail today, Jan. So, okay. We are looking possibly for a new place. We've heard recently that Oak Trace might invite us back, but we don't know for sure. They like the fact that we actually have meetings there and open it up to residents and stuff, other people, so that we're not just having a closed meeting there. So that's a possibility. Or if someone else knows of a place, of course, I know you can't really check on it. I did call the Lyle Library and she just laughed. So we can't really check on new places yet. So future meetings, both are Zoom. Northern Illinois, Doug Dahman on the 1st, Wisconsin, and January 8th, Chicago is Jennifer Murray on General George Meade. Okay, does anyone have any other messages they would like to?
Do we want to mention Chuck?
I'm getting there.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Anytime. Okay, so in your newsletter, we've had 2 deaths of the group recently. In your newsletter, it was a longtime member, Sam Blackwell, passed away December 3rd from a non-COVID related infection. He gave several cavalry-related presentations and was a familiar face at the Civil War shows. He authored in the first line of battle, the 12th Illinois Cavalry, and he was a longtime friend said that Sam felt his affiliation with the Civil War roundtables enriched his life. And we just found out that longtime member Chuck Kurtz passed away on December 12th. He was our liaison with Oak Trace. He was also on the board. And during the meetings, he ran the book raffle at the back table and he greeted people as they came in. So keep them and their families in your thoughts, please. I assume at some point we will make a donation in their names. Jan and I have talked about it, but because this has all been by Zoom, other than some membership renewals, we've had really no income coming in. The first donation will be for Ed. We have not done that yet, but it will be for Ed when we feel we can make one. Okay, so tonight, Brian Conroy is going to give us a talk on the 1st Michigan Engineers. Brian is also on our board and he does handle our website and Facebook pages. He is a reenactor and a living historian. He's been one since 2000, portraying fur trader and Chicago politician and businessman. Is this Gurdon?
Gurdon, yes.
Gurdon Hubbard. And he's presently the first sergeant of the modern day group portraying the 1st Michigan Engineers and Mechanics Company E. So go ahead and take it away, Brian.
Okay, yes. Gurdon Hubbard. So if you know Hubbard Street up in Chicago, Hubbard's Cave, they're all named after him. Very interesting guy. Go look him up. All right, so we will start here. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. So we will. Oh, hang on 1 second. We got to do a full. Keep hitting the wrong buttons. All right. There we go. Okay. So you can see on there that is really a button that would have been worn on with the engineers. Essayons is really the motto of engineers. really means let us try. That became the motto of that was one of the mottos of the engineers. You can see there's the sun here and then also a castle. All right, so we're going to actually start off talking about engineers in the military in general. So your first chief of engineer was appointed by General George Washington. He was Colonel Richard Gridley. That was in 1775. In 1802 was the Military Peace Establishment Act, which directed a Corps of Engineers to be established. And they were stationed at West Point in the state of New York and shall constitute a military academy. So this is the beginning of West Point. West Point was originally an engineering school and later also artillery. That opened July 4th, 1802. Its sole function was to train engineers, and the first superintendent was Major Jonathan Williams, who was the great-grandnephew of Benjamin Franklin. Their main responsibility throughout the country were building coastal fortifications, lighthouses, roads, to survey and map lands and rivers throughout the new continent, the young continent, and then to dredge and clear harbors and waterways and build jetties and piers. So you can see from left to right, you have Colonel Richard Gridley, Major Jonathan Williams, and then that is a sketch of West Point in 1803. At the beginning of the Civil War, the U.S. Corps of Engineers was only 43 officers and 100 enlisted men. So, August 1861, Congress approved 3 additional companies of engineers with 150 men per company. Throughout the war, a lot of engineer officers, qualified officers in the Engineer Corps, went into command volunteer regiments. There was more of a chance for advancement for those men. So really it left 117 officer commissions throughout the war. Three of those engineer commissions actually commanded engineer units. Others engaged in seacoast defenses, general staff headquarters, coastal and site surveying, and then 39 were staff engineers. July 17th, 1862, Congress recognized the volunteer engineers, sappers, and minor regiments and infantry regiments later reorganized as engineer regiments on equal footing with regular Army Corps of Engineers. So it gave them comparable organization, pay, emoluments, and benefits as the general U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And those volunteer corps were the 1st New York, the 15th New York, 50th New York, 1st Michigan, and 1st Missouri. In addition to the 1st Michigan Engineers, you had 2 other engineer regiments that were formed in Michigan. So the first one was Chadwick's Engineers. It was organized by Walton Chadwick, and they were organized November 1st, 1861 in Marshall, Michigan. They were disbanded only 30 days later in Detroit, and it only consisted of 13 enlisted men. The second of those 2 was Howland's Engineers, organized by Edwin Howland. They were organized September 16th, 1861 in Battle Creek, Michigan, and they only existed until January 8th, 1862, where they were disbanded in St. Louis because General Henry Halleck, who was the commander of the theater, he deemed them to not meet organizational standards of the Federal Army, and that only consisted of 58 men. All right, regimental history of the 1st Michigan Engineers. So you can see a beautiful flag of the 1st Michigan right there. So it started off as with a letter to the War Department from William Innes. He was from Grand Rapids. He wrote to ask the War Department to accept a regiment of engineers, and Governor Blair actually approved of this. The governor gave authority for 10 companies to be officered and equipped as an infantry regiment, and also would fill in for engineering service. They approved the same level of pay and allowance as regular Army Corps of Engineers. So they enlisted also in Marshall, Michigan, October 29th, 1861. I always like to say that the regiment marshaled into Marshall, marshaled in at Marshall. I know, I find that funny too. So they were organized into companies A through K. J did not really exist in regiments because it looked too much like the letter I on paper. So J was never really existed. So, so this is William Innes. He was the overall commanding officer of the entire regiment. Like I said, he was from Grand Rapids. These are some of the officers of the 1st Michigan Engineers. So you have Captain Baker Borden of Company B, First Lieutenant John Williamson of Company D, Captain Wright Coffenberry of Company C, First Lieutenant James Robinson, Company C, Captain Silas Canfield of Company E, and Captain James Slay of Company F. Now in 2011, we went out to the 150th Bull Run reenactment, and I actually met a National Park Service guide who he was from Grand Rapids, and he actually held the sword of Captain Coffenberry at the Grand Rapids Historical Society, which made me realize I need to go to Grand Rapids one of these days. All right, so the regiment departed on December 17th, 1861 for Louisville. They consisted of just over 1,000 men. They reported to General Buell, who divided the regiment among the Army of the Ohio. So companies B, E, and I went to General Buell at Munfordsville. D, F, and G went to General Thomas at Lebanon. Companies C and H to General Nelson at New Haven, and companies A and K to General Mitchell at Bacon Creek. 1862, January 19th, you had Mill Springs. Companies D, F, and G were there. And they did fight. Companies A and K, who were with General Buell's army, were occupying Bowling Green and then Nashville after Fort Donelson. In that March, you had the remainder of the regiment pretty much focused on building railroad bridges in Franklin, Columbia, Murfreesboro, and other places throughout the state. That April, you had the regiment helped General Buell to reinforce Grant's army at Shiloh by building bridges very quickly for the army to move. Companies A and K were with General Mitchell's division. They moved towards Corinth, again, building railroads, siege gun emplacements, corduroy roads, and other defensive works. In June, from Corinth to Decatur, you had 3,000 feet of bridge constructed by companies A and K. And in July, you had the entire regiment was assembled at Huntsville, Alabama. This is pretty much the only time in the entire war that, aside from arriving at Louisville together, that the entire regiment was there together. The rest of the war, the entire regiment was piecemealed out among different armies. That August, Colonel Innes took 5 companies to rebuild the bridges on the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, which had been destroyed by General Morgan. So you can see, no, I was wrong. Yeah, so here you go. So here's the Louisville and Nashville Road right here. So this is where they were building, right here. That September, General Buell's army, they were assembled at Louisville, and they advanced into Kentucky. Companies A, C, and H were at Perryville, where you had 17 of the 1st Michigan were wounded at Perryville. And actually, this is actually at the 154th Perryville in 2016. These are all men who were portraying from different states. They were portraying engineers. Hang on. This is George. His great-grandfather was with Company C and fought at Perryville. So November to December, you had the army was at Nashville, and they were building bridges to prepare for the advancement on Murfreesboro. And you can see, you know, a pattern of the majority of the regiment's work was a lot of bridge building and railroad building. You had that end of December into January, you had Stones River. First Michigan was actually in the rear of the Army to protect the communication lines and the supply trains. And then this is right here. This sign is there at Stones River. You can see the 1st Michigan Engineers, commanded by Colonel William Innes. 2 killed, 9 wounded, 5 missing. Now, there at Stones River, you had approximately 3,000 to 4,000 Confederate cavalry of General Wheeler attacked just under 400 men of the 1st Michigan. The 1st Michigan took the wagons and brush and actually held off several charges. So pretty much this is the relay from the Cincinnati Commercial newspaper in an account. Pretty much what it's saying is Wheeler attacked, and Colonel Innes, General Wheeler actually put forth the demand for the 1st Michigan to surrender after being repulsed multiple times. And Colonel Innes came back with what really became the motto of the engineers for the rest of the war. He said, "We don't surrender much." And they didn't surrender. And Wheeler then asked permission to bury his dead, which was granted. All right. So continuing on 1863, they went through, the regiment was scattered throughout Laverne, Murfreesboro, Smyrna, and Nashville. Again, bridges, blockhouses, magazines, buildings for commissaries and ordnance stores, and railroad tracks. That June 29th, the Army went down on Chattanooga. And again, continuing on with bridge building and repairs, railroads. And you had the bridge over the Elk River, which was 460 feet long and 40 to 60 feet high, was built in 8 days. And that is the bridge at Elk River, right there. And you can see right here, you have officers of the 1st Michigan. This is the surgeon, William DeCamp, Captain James Sly of Company F, and his adjutant, Charles Calkins. Duck Creek was another bridge, 350 feet long in the same amount of time, 8 days. Companies D and K went with the Army to Chattanooga, built pontoon and trestle bridges, and they built a pontoon bridge at Browns Ferry across the Tennessee River. During the night while they were there at Browns Ferry, Captain Fox of Company D, in command of 3 companies of that regiment, placed the pontoon bridge in proper position across the river, which they accomplished in 7 hours, and only a short time was consumed in the construction of 52 pontoon boats and their formation into a serviceable bridge. So that is another view of the Elk River Bridge right there. And that is Captain Perrin Fox. He was also from Grand Rapids. So in 1862, we'll go back a little bit. 1862, you actually had a decision to allow recruiting parties to go back to Michigan and organize new companies for the regiment. They secured 913 recruits, which not only filled the existing companies up to full strength, but they formed 2 new companies, companies L and M. Late 63 to early 64, construction of the Nashville and Northwestern railroads from Nashville to Chattanooga, and companies L and M were at Stevenson, Alabama. In June, except for Company C at Chattanooga and companies L and M who were in Stevenson, Alabama, the regiment went with General Sherman on his march towards Atlanta, and they repaired and rebuilt bridges and railroads, and the regiment that accompanied with General Sherman arrived in Atlanta on September 28th. Now on November 2nd, while they were there in Atlanta, the regiment's 3-year term expired. So you had veterans who did reenlist and kept the regiment at full strength, but some chose not to reenlist and they returned home to Michigan. Now this is a design, I believe it's a block, yeah, for railroad defense blockhouses. Now this was made by Captain William Merrill. Captain Merrill was not with the 1st Michigan, but he was with the Topographical Department and the Army of the Cumberland. So most likely there was interaction between himself and the 1st Michigan. Now on November 15th, General Sherman, his march to the sea commenced, and the regiment attached itself to the 14th Corps, and they constructed bridges and pontoon bridges for the Army. They tore up railroad track for the Confederates not to use anymore. They burnt bridges and they repaired and built roads through marshes as well, so they could continue on. December 11th, they arrived in Savannah, Georgia, and were employed to construct defenses and destroy property useful to the Confederate Army. The day, Christmas Eve, they moved into the city, and before they then moved north through the Carolinas with the rest of the Army. They were, like the rest of the Army, employed to destroy public property, twist railroad tracks into Sherman neckties, build and repair bridges, all in advance of the Army so that there was no delay. Companies L and M were still in Tennessee and were present at the siege of Murfreesboro, and that company was captured there at Murfreesboro. When they were released, they were sent by steamer to meet the regiment at Goldsboro, North Carolina. March 19th to the 21st was the Battle of Bentonville, I believe. Nope, I'll get to that picture later. I thought I had it on the next slide. April 10th to the 14th was the advancement on an occupation of Raleigh. And April 26th was the surrender of General Joe Johnson at Bennett's house. May 24th was they marched in the Grand Review. Now the Grand Review was marched pretty much how the in the division of the armies. Now engineers were always in front of the army, so the 1st Michigan was pretty much at the front of the beginning of the Grand Review. In June, they marched to Louisville, Kentucky, and then Nashville, and they were there until July 1st, went until September 22nd. They constructed additional defenses around Nashville, and on September 22nd, they were mustered out of service and marched to Jackson, Michigan. And on October 1st, they arrived, they were paid, and the regiment was disbanded. So in the entire war, so the whole regiment consisted of 2,920 men. They lost 1 officer and 12 enlisted men who were killed or mortally wounded, and 351 enlisted men died of disease. So they had a total of 364 men who were lost throughout the war. Let's see. All right. So these are just a few of the pictures of 1st Michigan. So this is, if you go on Google and look up the 1st Michigan Engineers, this is an unidentified picture of a soldier from the 1st Michigan Engineers. This is for the regiment, this is a very famous picture. So this is on Lookout Mountain. This is Company C. So during the battle, they actually hauled a cannon up to the top of the mountain. However, because of the height, they actually couldn't get a correct angle to rain down enough fire on the Confederates who were below them. But they did, while they were there, they did build a steam mill. They cut their own lumber, and they actually built quote unquote homes for themselves to live in instead of tents. Now, James Cutler of Hastings, Michigan, he enlisted in Marshall on December 24th, 1863. He sent this photo home to his wife, Julia. And I am not sure which one of these guys he is. I've looked in a couple different places. I might have missed it, but I'm not sure which one they actually are. He actually is. But these are musicians from Company C, and man in the middle here with the guitar was First Lieutenant Joseph Herkner. This is William DeCamp. He was the regimental sergeant. He was from Grand Rapids. Now, this is a very unusual picture. It's not that often that you see somebody with an open jacket. They're usually in a photo. It's usually buttoned up, but this is one of those. I think this might be the first picture I've ever seen of especially an officer posing with an open jacket. This is James Sly. He was captain of Company F. That one officer that they lost, this is the one. He was injured. His train that he was on was derailed because of an attack by Confederate guerrillas, and he died from those injuries. So he was the only officer that was actually lost for the regiment throughout the entire war. This is Albert Culver. He was from Ionia. He was born in New York, Cuyahoga County, New York in 1832. 1839, they moved to Holly, Michigan. He was a teacher for a short time before he opened up his own business. And in 1861, he actually helped to raise the 1st Michigan and was assigned as a second lieutenant with Company E. In 1862, he was promoted to 1st lieutenant. 1864, due to failing health, he resigned his commission, returned home after the Battle of Lookout Mountain, and he passed away while visiting his son in Mexico in 1905. Now, in July 2017, the modern day 1st Michigan engineers were contacted by his great-grandson, John Culver, who lives in Durango, Colorado. And he asked us if he said, we have letters from him who nobody else in my family wants them, and they're getting older just like me. Do you want them? We said yes. So he sent us 22 letters and a quartermaster's report. Mainly the letters spoke of missing home, sickness at home and in camp. It wasn't really battle. It was how he felt in camp and everything that was going on in camp, how he was sick, regiment on the move, upcoming battles being spoke of. So we have the modern day 1st Michigan. We tossed a couple of ideas back and forth of where to send these letters to preserve them. We do not have any of those facilities. And in the future, it was supposed to have been this year, but with everything else, it didn't happen. We are going to be donating those letters to the Civil War Museum in Kenosha, because they already have some letters from another member of Company E of the 1st Michigan up there in Kenosha. And I don't remember his name of who they have. So these are just a couple of the letters right here. You can see, we're still working on some transcriptions of some of the letters, but one of the things you actually see, I thought I put it in here, but if you look up here, right up here, you can see there is letterhead, company letterhead, right up there, original company letterhead. So we have a member of our unit he works in a print shop. He did these digital scans and has been transcribing these letters. He actually digitally erased the writing, and we actually have pages with authentic company letterhead that we can actually write on for any index or anything like that, which is very, very cool. Are we okay? All right. So some uniforms and equipment. These are a couple of watercolors or a couple of colorized photos. So you have a couple of different jackets here. So one you have, there we go. So this right here, this is more of your, It's a frock coat. It's a longer coat. You can see it's 9 buttons. This is more of a dress parade for this kind of a jacket. When you were out in the field and working, you would wear more of the fatigue blouse right here. So you can see he's holding a rifle, and then he's holding an axe. So, and then you also have 2 different kinds of hats. You have a kepi right here and I'm blanking on the name, a hardy hat right here. These are a couple of,
Brian, can you
yes,
go back to the previous slide for just a
sure,
second?
Dan. Correct me.
Just wanted to note the trim on the frock coat.
Yes,
The color is orange.
yes,
And
that's
that was
early
the
war.
color of the engineers was
Yes.
burnt orange.
Yes. Thanks, Dan. These are some tools from our modern day regiment. These actually belong to our captain. You can see there's a Springfield right here, binoculars, hatchet, sheath tools, so shovel, axe, full pack right here, a couple of leathers, and then it's all on a gum blanket and then a wool blanket as well. All right, so monuments to the 1st Michigan. So this monument is in front of the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan. I took this picture I was up there a few years ago. We were at a reenactment up in Jackson, Michigan. So this is on the grounds of the state capitol building. It was dedicated October 12th, 1912, and it is only one of 2 regiments to be represented on Capitol grounds. The other one, I believe, is a sharpshooter regiment. I don't remember which one. So this is a close-up of one of the plaques right there. So it gives the entire regiment of the entire history of the regiment right there. So they started off in Marshall and went through, and then they disbanded at Jackson. This is at Chattanooga. This is Orchard Knob at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. This was dedicated in 1899.
Looks like you just did it.
And then this is more of a close-up. You can see they are assembling railroads as well. So you have a couple of officers right here, and then the men here are assembling railroad. This is in Marshall, Michigan. So this plaque is right outside the GAR Hall. And how it goes, this is line by line. 1st Regiment Michigan Engineers, September to December 1861. Left Camp Owen, Marshall, Michigan for the front December 17th. 1,032 strong. Colonel William P. Innes commanding. Served in Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Marched with Sherman to the sea. 1861 to 1865. Marshall honors them with this plaque. And then this is the dedication of that plaque with veterans of the regiment in 1911. Post-war, this is Lieutenant Colonel Kinsman Hunton of Marshall. He was, before the war, he was a master mechanic and superintendent of the repair shops for the Michigan Central Railroad. He left the regiment in fall of 1864 and he came to Chicago, became a druggist, died in 1885 and buried at Rose Hill. This is his gravesite. Every Veterans Day, well, most of this year we did not, but every Veterans Day we not only do a living history timeline that goes from Revolutionary War up to modern day, but right after the public ceremony, we as a regiment go over to his grave and pay our respects to Lieutenant Colonel Hunton. And then here is men of mostly Company F, but also one man from Company E. So you can see Captain Sly here, who was killed in battle, and then you have Private Epsilon Hatch, Solomon Miles, Louis DeCracker, Philip Honsinger, Lafayette Charter, Jonathan S. Holmes, all of Company F, and then F. Bortle, I don't know his first name. He was with Company E. I think this is a very neat picture. This is Daniel McGuire. He joined Company K in 1864. He was a carpenter, and this is his grave site in Woodsum, Michigan. Today's regiment. So the picture on your left is one I was looking for earlier. 2015, those of us who you see in the picture, we went to the 150th anniversary reenactment of Bentonville, North Carolina. First Michigan was there. Their trenches are still there. We were camped 15 feet from those trenches. It was a very, very cool thing to do. And on the right, you can see us digging our trenches. Now, we were digging a 4-foot by 4-foot trench. Imagine not only us, but you had over 100 men digging that trench, not only with shovels and picks, but cups and plates as well. It was very, very surreal. The battlefield that was actually fought on was cotton and cornfields, and they had actually just harvested, and we were going through, and I actually found a couple of pieces of cotton from the battlefield, and I have that at home in a plastic bag, which is a very nice, it's a keepsake I'll always have. Now, the modern day regiment was founded in 1987, and in and around the Chicago area, we've gone to events, at least since I've been with them, in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Wisconsin. Along with myself, you have Salt Creek members Dan McCarthy, who is our first lieutenant, and I'm sure some of you remember Jerry Feinstein. He was our sergeant major. He is our sergeant major emeritus. This is 130th Murfreesboro, 1993. So you have this sergeant right here is our present day Captain Mark Dembski. This is Chris Mantis, who up until this year was first sergeant. I took over from him. This is Steve Dembski right here, Mark's brother, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. This was a documentary at Fredericksburg that was filmed, and a few of our members actually went out there and worked on the pontoon boats that are out there. This is our signal tower. We put it up in 2006. It is tarred and lashed. There were no nails in it. It was only supposed to stay up 7 years. It stayed up 9 years. And it took us a good amount of summer and fall to get it erected. This is at Napier Settlement Reenactment in 2011. We are establishing Chevaux de Frise. Right here, you can see the crowd looking on here. Yeah, there's Chris, right here, Chris Mantis. Some of you may or may not have known Bruce Mayhew, right here. He passed away earlier this year. This is Steve Dembski again. This is our first corporal, Joel Colicchio, who is also our chief of construction. And you can't see, but this is me right here, hidden behind Joel, right there. I always know it's me because I know my hat. I can always identify myself by my hat. This was at 150th Gettysburg. So there are 26 men in this picture. We were actually one large unit consisting of 4 conglomerated units. So in addition to the 1st Michigan, you had men from the 9th Indiana, the 8th Veterans Reserve Corps, and Taylor's Battery. We had a couple of different jobs there. Some of us, we actually cut a couple of like various size posts, and we created a post road out from the Union camp out to the battlefield. And then those who did not participate in that, we had gone and done reconnaissance where everything was, such as medical and the Confederate camp and other places. And those of us who did not do the post road actually sat down and by sunlight and then eventually by candle and lantern light actually hand inked multiple copies of maps to be distributed throughout the Union Command. This was, we like to have fun. So this is the 4th of July parade up in Skokie, 2011. You can see there's Dan right here. And, you know, we got, I think we had here's Jerry, and we had a couple of new recruits right here, I'd say. They were a lot of fun. Yeah, Skokie is always interesting. There's not only these guys, but you have the Shriners on their little cars that go around. I seen a camel last year. So
You'll note the militia uniforms on the right there.
What's that, Dan?
Different colors. The militia uniforms on the right.
Yeah.
It's a joke, Brian.
I know. I know. And then there's good old Jerry Feinstein right here. He always he drove the van.
Look more like Zouaves.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
them
they
too.
do.
Them too. This is at one of our years at Rose Hill Cemetery. So not only us, but you had World War II as well. And then this is Chris Kubaki, who's also a member of the unit. He passed away this year after a good long battle with cancer this year for the past couple of years. This picture was taken at the 150th anniversary of President Lincoln's funeral in Springfield in 2015. That was a very, very powerful event, very, very once in a lifetime event.
Yep.
And then, join the engineers. They said it'll be safer. They said this is a nice illustration of Fredericksburg as engineers were attempting to build pontoon bridges as they were being fired upon by Confederate snipers. And then these are, if you want to learn more about the 1st Michigan and also on engineering, anything in the Civil War, My Brave Mechanics is the regimental history of the 1st Michigan Engineers. And another book that I have at home is Engineering Victory: How Technology Won the Civil War. So that is it. Okay, you can go right here. And then, yeah, stop share. There we go. I finished.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cindy, you're on mute.
In a long time.
Okay, I have a
There you are.
question. Okay, how much training, if any, did these guys have? And I'm thinking about the bridges.
Well, you have to understand that for engineers, for the engineering company, they came in already to get into the regiment. You had to have a particular skill set. You had to have a trade. You had already. They would bring in for the first 2 years of the war. They really 100% of the regiment was already tradesmen, skilled tradesmen. So you had carpenters and blacksmiths and coopers. And in 1863, there is actually a bill passed, and that was really only 75%. Then it went down to 75%. The other 25% could just be general labor and infantry that were brought
A
in.
lot of the officers were civil engineers.
Yeah, a lot of the
Oh,
officers
okay.
were
A
civil engineers.
considerable number of men at the beginning were railroad employees.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, just like
that makes
Sly.
sense.
Sly, or no, that's like Innis. Innis worked for the Central Michigan Railroad.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? You're gonna ask questions. Make sure you're not on mute.
Anyone else have a question?
What was their standard of equipment? In other words, for a company of 150 men, how many axes would they have? How many,
I don't
whatever
know
other-
that offhand. I believe there was a standard amount. I do not know that offhand what it would have been, but there were, they were issued because the majority of their equipment all that were transported on wagons. But when the men were on the march, they were given their tools and in slings, because they were out ahead of the army. Not only did they have their tools, but they had the rifles as well. So they went out and they had some men had shovels, some axes, and because if something was ahead of the army and blocking the army, it had to be moved. So they needed their tools for that. Small tools, larger tools could have been manufactured if they were going to be in a certain place for an extended period of time. They could have built a sawmill or anything like that for milling lumber, but they always had at least one man had some type of an instrument, so that if something was up ahead, they could deal with it.
Were most of the buildings done or the construction done without hammer nails and by ropes and the rest?
Dan, you want to answer that?
Yeah, like that signal tower we built was done
Right.
with tarred rope, and most of your construction is temporary.
Yeah.
And like the bridges were built without things like nails or hammers or whatever.
Because remember, they had to transport it all, and if you lost, you had to be prepared. If you lost a shipment,
Mhm.
you were left with it. So you had to know how to build it without any of those things.
Mhm. Yeah, well, you remember the quote from Lincoln about the bridge over the creek, and there was nothing in it but bean poles and corn stalks. And that's actually a fairly accurate way of depicting it. It was all, you had to build it quick. It was temporary, either because you moved on and you didn't want to leave it for the enemy, or because the enemy would destroy it, one way or the other. So you weren't really looking to build for the ages.
Yeah,
with these
it was
things.
only there as long as the army was there.
Mhm.
And a lot of times what they did was the engineers would be out ahead of the main body of the army by a matter of days, because if there was a river to cross, there needed to be a bridge built by the time that the army got there so that they could cross as soon as possible. There were a couple of instances, especially early in the war, where they didn't get their equipment on time and they were left waiting for quite a few days until the pontoons arrived. So
That at
and there was nothing
Fredericksburg.
they could do until they got their equipment.
Mhm.
When these bridges were built on pontoons, were they were obviously then attached to the bridge, to the pontoons with tarred rope to tighten them down.
Yeah.
They didn't nail them to the pontoons.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
the
you had to-
chest would, yeah.
Because once the army was gone, you had to take those pontoons out. So
Right.
you couldn't nail it in because it would take too long to take nail by nail out.
That's fascinating to me.
Mhm. The one that's most noted, that the time of the first Michigan, the project that's mentioned in other memoirs and things, was at Chattanooga, when they built their own sawmill, put together pontoon boats, used them to go down the river, taking infantry with them, down the river to Brown's Ferry, land the infantry, then take the pontoon boats they just used to go down there and build the bridge. So it was rather impressive to the people who witnessed it.
Now, these pontoon boats, Dan, were they were not all wood. Were they not also canvas?
Yes.
Yeah, you would have had the wooden boats and then you would have had them covered with canvas.
Mhm.
Fascinating.
We have somewhere a couple of pontoon boats couple of frames and canvas for him that we've put together.
There's a question in the chat, were all of the men armed or was there a guard service which did the fighting? The 1st Michigan Engineers were combat engineers. They already had the skill set to be engineers, but they still went through training, infantry training, because they had to be able to protect themselves. Going back to Stone River, you had the men who they were, just under 400 men were attacked by 3,000 to 4,000 Confederate cavalry. And the 1st Michigan, they took the brush and they took wagons and they encircled themselves and they held off the Confederate cavalry. And they did until, they tried frontal assaults and side assaults. And eventually General Wheeler, he sent in the message demanding that the 1st Michigan surrender. And that's when Colonel Innes sent back the response of, "We don't surrender much." And they continued to hold them off. I know it's always funny. And but they had to protect themselves because remember, like I said earlier, they were ahead of the main body of the army. And you had bushwhackers and guerrillas. So they had to be able to protect themselves.
Another question, if I may. When the men were, as a regiment, building a pontoon bridge, were there men set aside with arms in case they were attacked? Or was everybody working and just once in a while, when they were, not once in a while, but when they were attacked, how did they decide who was going to build and who was going to fight?
Well, that would be the officers. Now, he showed that picture of the bridge with the 3 officers that he mentioned. That's only part of that picture.
Yeah.
If you look at the entire picture, I believe on the left side, you see a number of men being marched off with rifles.
Yeah.
To protect the bridgehead.
Because sometimes not only did you have the 1st Michigan who was defending their own men, but if they were with the main body of the army, you would have infantry. You would have infantry with them, and they would be protecting the engineers while the engineers would build.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, just a few reminders. January 15th, 2021, Art Foley will present the Battle of Honey Springs. And, I forgot to mention before, we're coming up to election time for the group. I don't know why I'm saying this. So if anyone is interested in having a position on the board or being an officer, let us know. That would be great. And I guess I have nothing else other than to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Everybody stay safe, and here's hoping for a better year in 2021.
Hear, hear.
Here, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Okay.
Merry Christmas.
Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry
Thanks, Bruce.
Christmas.
Cheers.
See ya.
Good speech, Brian.
Thanks, Dan.
You decided it would be
I
better
think
to-
Mark chimed in. I think
For a little while, but he
Yeah.
left fairly quickly too.
Take us home.
and then John was here.
John.
John, why aren't you coming out with us?
John is here. Well,
Oh, John's gone.
Might be at the,
Yep.
might be at the Historical Society.
We'll see you on the 22nd, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That it was better to shut the